we talked about the SOC capabilities. Now we have the telemetry, now we have the visibility. So how can we identify threats? And since we mostly in our minds, right, mostly just, I feel like talking about ransomware attacks, and those are pretty noisy, and they would usually tell you anyways, once somebody get compromised. I wanted to elaborate a little bit more on threat intelligence and threat hunting. And for those here, the threat intel people or hunters, it's just a very high level overview, but I just want to make sure we're all on the same page here, because I feel like oftentimes there's some confusion about it. So what are we typically dealing with when we talk about advanced persistent threats? So those are most of the time threats that try to steal data or disrupt operations and destroy infrastructures, but they are typically the attackers that would pursue their objectives over months or years. So they are the stealthy ones, right? They're not the ones that would call you and say, hey, we have data stolen. They would extort you and you would be notified about this anyways. They have basically long-term goals. These are mostly nation state, and they have long-term goals to infiltrate an environment and steal data or disrupt operations. And that's why they want to typically try to be stealthy, not be detected, and not get kicked out of the environment. And so that's where we really need to kind of put our threat hunter hat on and understand the advanced ways of how we can actually potentially detect and identify those attacks, and to proactively hunt for those and uncover and detect those advanced attacks. We typically need those capabilities such as threat intelligence, so that we can turn the intelligence then into effective threat hunting operations. So this is why threat intel and threat hunting go hand in hand. Oftentimes we need both in order to really actually get some advanced hunting going based on the particular threat actor that we are looking at. And this is what I just want to get into for just a few more slides, so that everybody better understands of how this is carried out and how this is different from a, hey, we have an alert, this might be ransomware, let's quickly respond, because on those tactics and techniques of a ransomware threat actor mostly detected pretty easily because they're quite noisy. They just, it's all about speed there. So what are those advanced persistent threats? Most organizations have different naming conventions, and Microsoft just last year, I think, came out with a new naming convention. Mandiant always had like a very straightforward one. They just called it APT, followed by the number, right? APT1, APT10, APT41. Microsoft just came out with a new way. And so this is what I wanted to show you here. Microsoft basically defined a nation state and assigned a weather event or a family name that is tied to the particular country. And then there is also additional family names that don't really necessarily fit into a specific country. So for example, we have what they call the Sangria Tempest. And as you can already see, as part of the family name down here, we have Blizzard for Russia, Typhoon for China, Sandstorm for Iran, and so on. And then there's Tempest, which are financially motivated threat actors. They might or might not be affiliated with like certain nation states, but they are not clearly assigned to a nation state. So that's what they're using in financially motivated. And in other, for other vendors such as Mandiant, for example, this is what they would, for example, call Fin7, which is a very famous threat actor group, has been around for many, many years with the goal, financially motivated with the goal to make money through cybercrime. And so this is just one way of how we can look into threat actors, APTs, and their profiles. Those are pretty well documented, but not all of them are always documented like that. Now, let's look into the Fin7 since we're already talking about it. And I really like this example because that makes it more clear why it's not as straightforward to just slap a name on a thread at an APT group and just say this is what they do and this is who they are. For example, Fin7 has been around for a very long time. And just recently, there was there was some news out that Fin7, which is technically Russia linked, they're selling their tools in the dark web. And so now, since they're selling the tools, which is AV Neutralizer, The tool is basically used to bypass security controls. And this is, pretty interesting for us because even if we think we know everything about how to bypass security controls, well, these guys are coming out with new stuff, new tools constantly to bypass whatever we have available at this point. So it's a constant race, but they have a pretty advanced tool apparently, which is AV Neutralizer. And since they're selling it, all of a sudden we have more threat actors using the exact same tools, such as Blackbuster, which is a ransomware group. And this is why it's tricky, because they are selling it in the dark web and they're using different names. Fin7 is using, pseudonyms such as these couple of different names that you see here. You can't always just attribute it to the same group. That's always tricky. So that's why threat intel and attribution of a group makes it hard. And as you can see here, so this is what the Mandiant researchers said, actually the Sentinel-1 researchers. The group's use of multiple pseudonyms and collaboration with other criminal entities makes attribution more challenging and demonstrates advanced operational strategies. So long story short, multiple threat actors might use similar tools, overlapping techniques, and this is what makes it pretty difficult to attribute an attack to a certain attacker. But for that, we have threat intelligence, right? That's why we try to do that. That's why we try to gather intelligence about a particular adversary or behavior and then turn that into actionable information. And there's a really cool guide, actually. I like the guide a lot. It's on the CESA.gov site. It's called Best Practices for MITRE Attack Mapping, which kind of shows, how to go about mapping a behavior, as you can see here, into MITRE attack techniques that are more actionable later on. So in this case, we have, for example, a threat actor. We have a threat actor that we want to find out more about a specific behavior. So we're creating a profile about a threat actor. Then we research the behavior. We translate it into a particular tactic, such as is it persistence, execution, defense evasion, whatever it might be. Within the tactic, we can then identify the particular technique of how they are going to go about this, maybe even the sub-technique of which tools or which commands are being used. So once we have this identified, we can then create better hunts, threat hunts, to more likely be able to detect these kind of techniques. So that's where threat intelligence comes in. And then we can turn this into threat hunting to apply threat hunting and look for those attacks, techniques. And first, before we get started with threat hunting, it's not just, running IOCs. So threat hunting has nothing to do with just running indicators of compromise, hashes or whatever, and see what sticks. It's basically a more advanced kind of technique. And just long story short, you need to make sure that you have proper data, first of all, before you can actually apply threat hunting. Because like before, if you don't have any idea of the data that you have available, the telemetry that's available to you, if you don't have it standardized so you can search through it, and you don't have the relationships through data modeling, it's really hard to create hunts, effective hunts. So first of all, look into data quality before you can actually run the hunts. And that is really well described by the website here, threathunterplaybook.com. Pretty famous guy in the industry came up with this particular website where they talk about about best practices in threat hunting, and I really like this site. So feel free to check it out. But once we have the data available, first we study the adversary, we create hypotheses for the TTPs that the adversary is using. Then we determine the data that we need in order to collect and identify the particular techniques. Then we need to actually carry out the attack ourselves in a lab, for example, so that we can make sure that we actually can generate the type of attack and we can capture it effectively before we then use it for hunting in our production environment. And I hope that's clear, but to make this a little bit more specific in terms of an example. So for example, if we have an adversary that may leverage bypassing the UAC, the user account control on Windows, there is a way to do that by using the tool FODhelper.exe, which is a Windows internal tool. But there's a trick to bypass the UAC. It's pretty common, well known, but in order to create a hunt for this, if we figured out this is a tactic of a threat actor using it, we can create a hunt, multiple hunts for it, because there's multiple ways to look at it. But if we have sysmon available, sysmon log would be the event provider. We would look into the event ID 1, which is basically process creation. And most of the time when this attack technique appears, you'd have bot helper in the command line to be executed by the parent image, which is typically PowerShell. So PowerShell will basically run a command bot helper, and then there's also some registry operations, but this is just one hunt to go about this. Not the most effective one, but it's just a general one. And then there's probably a couple more we could create around this particular technique in order to then hunt for this. And these are the things that we do not know ahead of time, right? If we are compromised or not, we need to create a profile and then turn it into effective hunts in order to figure out whether we're compromised or not, whether we are affected by a particular threat actor. So this is one way to go about hunting. And if we have a hit, if we find that there's a true positive, we actually have a threat actor detected in the environment, that is where we will obviously then go into incident response. So if any questions, feel free to use the Q&A. I can already see there's a few questions already in there. And I see there's a few people messaging me too. Might not be able to get into all of these, but feel free to drop in the chat or into the Q&As, and I can then look at that in a little bit. But now, this is a whole lot of background on security and operations. Talked about threat hunting capabilities, increasing visibility, and why it's so important. Now, let's start with the incident response. And before we jump into our case, one of our incident capabilities in the SOC is incident handling.